In this fly tying video, I'm going to be tying an American Pheasant Tail Nymph. It is an excellent representation of many mayfly species in the nymphal stage, and it's no surprise that it's a firm favourite among many flyingers around the world. I'm tying this Pheasant Tail Nymph on a size 14 heavyweight nymph hook, which I've gone and debarbed using the vice jaws. The thread I'm going to be using is Veevus 12/0 in dark brown. And when I start tying this fly, I like to leave just a very small gap behind the hook eye, like so. I'll add a few thread wraps in, and then I'll simply continue to work my thread wraps down towards the bend of the hook, like so. For the tail and the body is cock pheasant tail fibres, and I like to select a nice, well-marked, dark brown feather for this particular fly. Now I'm going to take between 6 and 8 fibres, and I'll pull the fibres down to 90 degrees off the stalk of the feather or the rachis, and you can see there the tips start to line up quite nicely. From there I'll just take a nice tight grip on the fibres and peel them away. I'll then take those fibres and then measure them to about 2/3 of the length of the hook shank and secure them into the top of the hook shank using a pinch and wrap. For the ribbing of the fly, I'm going to be using UTC Ultra Wire, which is copper in extra small. However, if you prefer your pheasant tail nymphs to have a slightly more defined rib to them or a slightly heavier wire, you can go up in a gauge of wire into the small or whatever the corresponding is in the particular brand that you've chosen. Now, I like to create just this little kind of C shape with the wire, and I'll place the wire underneath the hook shank like so. Give it a little bit of a pull if it's a bit too long. So I want that wire to about 2/3 of the hook shank. From there I'll simply pull all the fibres back and add some wraps in, working the thread wraps back towards the hook eye. And you can see why I've done that with the wire is as I wrap, it grabs the wire and pulls the wire to the underbelly of the hook shank. From there I'm going to work my thread wraps back down to a very important part, and I'm going to use this as my reference from here on in. So I'm going to put that thread to 1/3 of the way down the hook shank, and I'm going to use that as a reference from here on in. So when I add these wraps, I'll take the first wrap of pheasant tail fibres, I'll put the wrap in nice and close to the base of the shank of the hook just to cover any exposed thread wraps. I'm going to add those in the opposite direction to my thread until I get to where my thread is, and then I'll use that mark to then catch those pheasant tail fibres in like so. So 3 wraps, more than enough, that'll trap it in like that. Now for the ribbing, I'm going to go in the opposite direction to the pheasant tail fibres, and I'm just going to add the ribbing in nice wide open turns. I'm looking to try and get roughly the same width as the body that I've created with the pheasant tail fibres, and then I'm going to work that up to where my thread is and trap the wire in along with the pheasant tail fibres. I'll simply work that towards the hook eye like so. I'm going to stop short of that mark where I started my thread wraps earlier. From there, trim them all off nice and close, and you should end up with something that looks like that. For the wing case and the legs, I'm going to use the same fibres, and I'm going to take around about a dozen or so now. Same process, I'm going to pull them down so they're all sat 90 degrees off the stalk of the feather, or the rachis of the feather, and I'll just simply make sure they're nicely lined up. And I'll just repeat that process. And pull them off. Now, there's two ways of tying the remaining section in. You can, if you want to tie the legs backwards and then fold them back over and then tie them in, you can do so. To do that, the measurements you'll be looking for is to get the back of the hook eye down to the bend. So you're looking to take around about that measurement there, and that will be your tying in point. You'll tie it in from that 1/3 marker that we had earlier. However, I like to tie mine somewhat differently. I'll tie mine facing forwards, and I'll measure those out to that same length as that body there, so 2/3 of the hook shank, and I'll trap those fibres in that little space that I created earlier, so just behind the hook eye. Now from there, I'm just going to add in thread wraps to secure it all in place on top. I'm going to work my thread back down to that 1/3 mark that we had earlier. Just do a quick check, make sure you're happy. If you think you've gone too far, you can backtrack at this point. But it's one of those that you can always peel the fibres forwards, and that will give you a good indication as to whether or not you got that mark right. For the thorax, I'm going to take a single strand of peacock herl. What I like to do is do what's kind of a little stress test. So I'll take the end between my thumb and forefinger and just give it a pull, and I'll do the same, give it a pull. I did it a couple of times, and that tends to take away the very brittle bits that you get at the end of the peacock herl. I'll then trap the peacock herl in top of the hook shank like so, and work my thread wraps back down like that. Now I'll do one final check just to make sure that we're at that third section, and then I'll start to apply these wraps in the opposite direction to my thread wraps again. So at this point I'm going underneath the hook, away from a body, being a right-handed tire. I'm going to work that up to just behind the hook eye, that little space that we had earlier. Now I'm going to spin my thread clockwise, and that's going to tighten the thread up and allow me to minimize this footprint, so I can then weave the thread through the peacock herl like so, minimizing the amount of fibres I catch in. And I'll work that up to behind the hook eye, and then I'll put in 3 or 4 wraps to trap that all in, and then pull that away like so. Now this next step, I'm going to use my thumb to push those fibres back like so. You'll see it kind of fans open, kind of like a bit of a peacock tail to it, and then I'm just going to move them around a little bit so I get a pretty even distribution of fibres. Once I'm happy that I've got a rough even distribution of fibres, I'll pull that forward and just give it a bit of a kind of wriggle around just to get those fibres sat nice and flat. I'm going to pull it over the hook eye, and while I do that I'm going to peel those fibres back like so. And I'm going to use another pinch wrap to trap that in, pull it up, 2 turns underneath, some wax into the thread, and I'm going to catch the pheasant tail fibres with about 4 or 5 thread wraps backwards. The next bit, I'm just going to untangle the pheasant tail fibres. They do have a tendency to kind of catch together a little bit, so I'll just untangle them quick. And I'm going to keep tension in the thread. I'm going to simply pluck these away, one or two at a time. Don't get too greedy with it, because they have a tendency to then break and leave a tag section, which then you might as well just use your scissors. Kind of like that one there. So you always try and minimise that. It does happen from time to time. Now, if you do get that, simple fix. Grab your tweezers, grab low down, and just pull it off. You'll never get it as good as, but you'll get it close. From there, I'm just going to add some thread wraps into the head area, just to help tidy everything up, and then finish with a 3 or 4 turn whip finish. Pull tight, snip that off, check the legs of my nymph and where I want them to be, and then go in with a bit of varnish. So apply some head cement into the thread and an optional into the thorax, and there you have your American Pheasant Tail Nymph.